Hi everybody, welcome to Wake Up Well. We are continuing our season where we think about life after lockdown and particularly about transitional times. That kind of time that you and I are in right now where we're not quite sure what the future holds. We're working somewhere towards it. We're coming out of lockdown together and we have options and possibilities ahead of us. And as Christians, we need to be aware all the time, I think, and approaching everyday life from God's perspective, trying to get what God's heart is, what God's view is on our options, on our choices, on our daily outlooks and so on. And we can do it from a really hopeful perspective, hopeful with a hopeful perspective of the future in mind. That's how Christians are called to live, not just in the present and the present reality, but always with an eye to the future and what's coming. So let's read, in light of that, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 1 to 6. And the context here is that Paul is actually talking about life after death and what happens next. He says this: "So we are always confident, even though we know that as long as we live in these bodies, we are not at home with the Lord. For we live by believing and not by seeing. Yes, we are fully confident, and we would rather be away from these earthly bodies, for then we will be at home with the Lord. So, whether we are here in this body or away from this body, our goal is to please Him. For we must all stand before Christ and be judged. We will each receive whatever we deserve for the good or evil we have done in this earthly body." So there's Paul. I mean, that's quite epic for someone to be able to say that, I think, to be able to say, well, I'm at home in this body, but really I want to be at home with the Lord. He's got to a certain place in his life to be able to say that. But the first thing he says is that we're always confident. And you and I can take that in this transitional time. We are always confident. And the reason, verse 7, is that Christians live by believing, not seeing. Christians live by believing, not seeing. That's how our faith is anchored. It's actually anchored in the unseen realm, which is the superior reality of the kingdom of heaven, which is available at all times and in all places. And somehow those priorities of God are always important, always relevant, always can break into the everyday, whatever the everyday holds. Now, the Apostle Paul had himself lived a fairly crazy life. It's not flippant that Paul says these kind of things. You're talking about someone who, this passage he's writing about death and a future hope, a heavenly future. But this is Paul who's lived so much. He faced trials, he faced hardships and pain in his life. He was one who's known lots and lots of travel. He's preached to big crowds. He's also ended up in prison, alone in a prison cell. So he's lived a lot, but for Paul, he didn't allow those experiences to define him. I'm not saying that they're not relevant. All of our life experiences, whatever your present reality is, of course it's relevant, but the question is, am I allowing it to, and it matters, but am I allowing it to define me or my choices or my mental health or where I'm pointing the direction of my life? And that's the difference. Paul didn't allow the present circumstances to change his ultimate destination, his ultimate trajectory. And that's how he stayed really, really hopeful, because he knows, we know that in Jesus we have this incredible hope and this future that's coming towards us all the time. So how does Paul manage to do it? Well, in verse 5 there's a clue which we didn't read, but it's this: God himself has prepared us for this kind of life. And as a guarantee, he has given us his Holy Spirit. So folks, you and I have to be filled again and again with the Holy Spirit. We have to come in worship and encounter and the Word and welcoming the truth of God and the reality of the heavenly perspective into the earthly every day, if we're going to live with that kind of hopeful perspective, even in trials and difficult times. So I wonder if you and I can take Paul seriously today. In verse 9 he says, whether we're here in the body or away from the body, in other words, in heaven, our goal is always to please him. It's a phenomenal thing that he says. But I think that we can live with this level of confidence, even in these transitional times, even if the future or the current present reality is a little bit scary or a little bit unwelcome. We can still live with that level of confidence. We can be upbeat in that sense because of what God has for us and who God is in us. In other words, the way that we live is by faith and not by sight. We live by faith and not by sight. We seek Jesus in the present, in the everyday, and that helps us to get the correct perspective on the everyday. And ultimately we know, as Paul wrote elsewhere in Romans 8, verse 28, that all things work for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. It's possible for God to work good through everything, all circumstances. So I would encourage you with this today. Don't over-focus on your present reality, what you think about it, or even what you feel about it. I'm not saying they don't matter, but I'm saying that we must allow them not to define us too much. Actually, let's focus on the greater reality. Let's realise that we're always citizens of heaven. We're safe in our Father's love, in our Father's purpose for us. Our bodies may decay, but our spirits are alive and ever more so. So I bless you with that